All right, so I want to talk a little bit about accessible mathematical notation. In this case, we're kind of lucky in that there's generally an accepted standard for how to do this. But just to refresh everybody, we've got our 5 principles of accessibility that we've been talking about and we'll continue to talk about this week. And mathematical notation equivalents really fall under the provide text equivalence principle, similar to an image or a photograph or a picture. And MathML is one of the programming or coding languages that's pretty universal and pretty broadly accepted for creating mathematical equations and providing that alt text. I want to talk about a few different ways we use this, or you can use this. One of them is to use an equation editor that does all the programming for you. MathType does this, and I'll talk more about that. Word 2019 or the 365 equation editor do MathML, but older versions of Word do not. So you got to be a little careful there about what version of Word that you're using. You can also, for those of you that use LaTeX, convert that code to MathML. And Sarah Hanush on Thursday afternoon is going to be giving a session on that. That's session 98 in the winter breakout sessions. Or you can go ahead and write the code yourself, and I'll show you an example of it just so you've seen it. So specifically with MathType, our campus has a license for MathType. It is incorporated as an add-on in Google Docs and Google Slides. You can get it as an add-on to your Microsoft Word if you talk with CTS. It's also added into our Blackboard shell, so you can use it within Blackboard when you're writing questions. If you need to use it a lot and you need to use it in some very specific ways, you can get the standalone version. Right now, the standalone version is only working in Windows because of the updates that Mac did in their operating system. Hopefully that's going to change, but it's the way it is. The other option for the standalone version is to use our Citrix Apps environment, which you'll go to their virtual login for Citrix Apps. You'll open all the apps and MathType is there. And when you open MathType, you'll get this full-blown equation editor within MathType, within Citrix, and you can write your equations and download them and use them wherever you need to and have that MathML incorporated. But what I want to do is talk a little bit more about using it within Google Docs and some other places. And as part of that, there is a discussion of this on how to make mathematical equations in the digital accessibility FAQ. And so if you happen to go to that FAQ site, we've got how to make equations in mathematical notation accessible. A couple examples, a really simple one and a more complicated example. But there's also a link to this Google Doc about accessible mathematical equations where I've written out a lot of the steps that we are talking about in this presentation. You can go and look at that and maybe take some more time to go through the specific ways that you can use MathType and create accessible equations. One of the things that I want to make clear is that it is possible to copy and paste equations between applications, and the MathML alt text should be preserved. I've done this from Google Docs to Microsoft Word. So it is possible to do this adjustment between multiple platforms and keep that language. So if you wanted, you could have a Google Doc with all your equations on it and then just copy and paste to wherever you need them. All right. For those of you interested in Blackboard, if you open up Blackboard and you add a new item and you've got your text window where you're typing in your information, you'll see that there's an FX button now. And if you click that button, it takes you into the math type editor and allows you to create equations, and it will drop it in with all the right coding. So you're good that way. The other way to do this is to write it yourself. And so here's the equation for the quadratic formula. And this is the math coding that would be required. And some of you are probably going, yeah, making scary faces and are thinking, I don't want to do that. There are editors out there that you can build upon and do this yourself. And this is an editor web-based that you can use that does the same, in this case, does generate not only the quadratic equation, but some other text related to it. If you want to play with coding, this kind of an online editor can be really helpful so that you can make changes and immediately see if you're going to get what you want. So this is the possibility. And just so you know, this is kind of what that alt text will end up looking like. The advantage here is that a screen reader or other accessibility features know exactly what to do with this language, this programming code. The last thing I really want to touch on and make sure everyone's aware of, to be sure that what you've created is compatible across all the browsers and platforms. If you're using it as HTML or in Blackboard assignments or tests, it's best to put this JavaScript language in your instructions for the test or in the HTML within Blackboard. What this does is it ensures that the MathML is translated correctly, regardless of what browser and what operating system you're using. There can be a little bit of hiccup if you don't include this, and I've run across it. And so I'm including this here. This is also in that accessible mathematical notation Google Doc that's on the FAQ. And then there's a little more detail about how to actually incorporate it. But this does make it more universal, and it ensures folks are going to see what you want them to see. And so last thing I wanted to do, besides maybe showing you some examples of how to create these equations, is just touch base on upcoming sessions related to accessibility. And tomorrow kind of ties in with this alt text, but in the context of doing captions and video, and creating inclusive virtual meetings, and then the drop-in session at 2 o'clock. Thursday, the current accessibility faculty fellows are going to do 4 sessions with their takeaways. There's going to be a session on accessibility checkers, and then the drop-in session. And then on Friday, Kate Percival is going to talk about PDF accessibility. There'll be the 1 o'clock session on changing the culture of accessibility on campus, as well as the drop-in session. And then all of you working on the challenge, day 10 will be the reflection survey that you need to do. All right. Rebecca, thank you for dropping those links in to the chat. What I want to do is I'm going to open a working document that I have in Google Docs just to show you how this can work. And I'm going to do a break. So you'll go to add-ons, same place that there's the Grackle docs for checking the accessibility of your document, but you'll choose math type and insert mathematical or math equation. The first time you do this, you might have to authorize it with your Oswego login, but once you've done it, here we get our basically editor where we can do whatever equation we want. And as I say, you can put in pretty much anything that you want. It does take a little time to get comfortable going through the various menus, but it does allow you to do superscript, subscripts, either after the number or before the number. And once you're all done with this, you just insert it. And if I right click on this and look at the alt text, there's my MathML in the description, as well as how it looks like it would be read. All right. Some of you might be saying, I don't want to juggle through all of those. If you have a touch screen, my guess is that you'll like this feature, which is basically you can handwrite your equations and it translates it into the text of the equation and keeps the MathML for you. Writing with a mouse, not so easy, but as I said, if you have a touch screen, that's a very efficient way to go. The editor for MathType is exactly the same if you're using it in Google Slides. It looks almost exactly the same within Microsoft Word as a plugin or add-on as well. And so, there's more complicated ways to create equations. There are simpler ways to create equations. To me, this is the simplest way to create accessible equations.
So the Word equation editor does not do that?
2019, Word 2019 or the 365 edition does. Word 2016 does not carry the MathML. Rebecca, what description could be copied and pasted into a web page? What you would copy is the MathML code, and that will get translated into the correct representation, both by the screen reader and by the web page.
Izzy, do you need something else in a web page other than that little code snippet?
To the best of my knowledge, no.
Okay.
We just need that code snippet. Although, as I said, it is a good idea to put this script in the header portion of your HTML code to be sure everything's interpreted correctly.
That looks like likely for maybe backwards compatibility.
It could be. I honestly haven't sat down to try and translate all of it or any of it. It's when I first started going down this pathway and discovering some hiccups, this was pretty universal, the solution to make things cross-platform and cross-browser compatible.
Cool, thanks.
So if James, Christina, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer or go through some other specific examples. But to me, it's really a case of learning that the tools are out there and then working with the tools to get comfortable actually using them. Overall, the MathType equation editor is pretty simple to use. And the ability to take this equation, copy and paste it, into any document and that MathML carries with it is really valuable.
Izzy, what's your workflow like? Do you generally do it using like a touch screen, or can you talk about like if you're making a presentation or something for students, like what your general process is?
So my general process is I do it just by hand type, by using the MathML plugin. And I've gotten comfortable enough with the menu items to go through pretty efficiently and pick and choose and set up the equation. I have not used the touch input, the handwriting input very often, largely because I don't generally work on a touch screen. But I can see benefits to doing that. The other part of it is I tend to keep a library of equations. So sometimes it's copy the equation, paste it to a new place, and then edit it to make it the way I want. Or equations that are closely related, copy one that's similar, and then just do the edits I need to make it appear effective. And so, you know, my advice is, if you don't go down the pathway of putting it, the Word plugin, if you're primarily a Word user, if you don't put it in your Word doc, you know, as a plugin, and you're using an older version of Word, you're hopping between versions of Word, I might suggest just having a Google Doc where you code all these equations and you just copy them out of that Google Doc and paste them into Word. You should be able to access your Google Drive and that document from any computer, and there's kind of workflow that way.
And that's preserving the alt text and MathML with it?
It does. It does. So if I copy this, let's see, do I have a Word? I don't have one open, but I can. So I just pasted that equation here. And it's going to prove me wrong, isn't it?
You're not sharing either, so.
Thank you very much. I'm going to have to do it this way. That's okay. So what I did is I copied that equation, pasted it into Word. But in this case, it doesn't show me the alt text the way I would have expected. So I would just come over here, capture my alt text, go back to the Word document, drop it in.
I thought it was interesting how the title is interpreted, how that multiplication sign is interpreted as cross times.
Yep.
I mean, is that on purpose?
I think it is, because it's a cross product, not a dot product. So if I go, actually I gotta go, so add on math type, edit the equation in this case. It's using it as a cross product as opposed to a dot product, because you have a dot product possibility as well.
Different glyphs have different codes.
And they have different mathematical meanings if you're really, really precise.
I'm not.
Most of the time, it doesn't matter for us. But so that, in a nutshell, is how you can process accessible equations, share them between sites, share them between documents.
Casey, I have a complex question for you as promised.
Shoot.
If you were to export a PDF or something using Grackle, which usually exports accessible PDFs, do you know if it maintains the accessibility?
You know what? I don't know that I've fully checked that, because I've done as much as I can to avoid PDFs.
Yeah, I don't blame you, but I foresee someone wanting to know that.
Well, just a second.
It took me a long time to think up a hard question, Casey.
All right. Processing.
I've not heard him this quiet before.
I suppose though, Rebecca, I'm gonna have to download it, aren't I?
The PDF.
Yeah.
The other way too is I'm wondering if you download the Word doc, if that also like maintains the alt text rather than copying and pasting. It may.
All right, so I'm gonna share this. So I pulled it in to Acrobat, ran the accessibility checker, and it doesn't like one figure, which, considering that this is a hodgepodge document that I was working with, I'm not surprised. Yeah, because I was using it for some other things. So it didn't flag these equations as a problem. And in fact, it passed. So I think they're okay.
Yeah, the key is using that Grackle rather than downloading. So if folks don't know, from Grackle, you can export rather than download.
I'll show folks just so that they. Let me get back into the document. So in a Google Doc, like we're looking at here, if you do the Grackle add-on and launch it, you'll get this accessibility checker, and I still have one error. Basically an image that doesn't have alt text. But if you export to PDF with this Grackle checker, the PDF will be accessible by and large. If you do download PDF, it's not going to be very accessible, or it won't be as accessible as if you put it out from Grackle. So that's an important note to keep in mind working with Google Docs. If you need to create a PDF for a print version or something, it's best to export it out of Grackle. So that was the deeper dive. Hopefully it wasn't too deep, and hopefully it wasn't too long. But it gives folks a chance to hopefully see how to work with what isn't too bad of an equation editor.
Casey, I just double checked too. If you download the file as a Word doc, it maintains the alt text.
Okay.
All right. If there's no further questions. All right. Thanks, Casey.
You're welcome.
All right, thanks. That was cool.